real honor to come down here and speak to you all, and I'm excited to share with you about Sweetwater Wetlands Park in Gainesville and about treatment wetlands in general. And first of all, I want to start out by asking, how many people have visited Sweetwater? That's pretty good, almost half the audience for a location that's 2.5 hours away. It's only been open for, well, it opened in 2015, so going on 9 years, 8.5 years, and it's already zoomed up to close to the top of the eBird hotspots in Florida. It's like number 32 or so, which is just amazing for when you compare all the sites in Florida that are birding hotspots that have been birded for decades and decades. So it's really a bird mecca, and with the public use facilities that the city designed with the park, that's just made it so much more accessible for us birders and wildlife photographers. Got to get all these things figured out here.
Looks like a gator.
Yes.
Supposed to be.
I will talk about that.
Debbie, hold the microphone close to your mouth.
Okay, Alan, it's changing on your screen, but it's not changing up here. Turn off.
She says it's not changing on.
So it's not changing.
Don't go over there.
Okay.
Oh, it's not changing, you're right.
But it did earlier.
Deborah, we need help.
Oh wait, let's go to maybe we got out of this much.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow
Go
we got out.
from the beginning.
There you go.
So, treatment wetlands, I need to kind of stand here so I can see my slides. Treatment wetlands are designed to treat wastewater and stormwater. And this is a natural process of removing the pollutants that are in wastewater and stormwater. And I'm going to mostly concentrate on wastewater treatment. And the most common ways of disposing of treated wastewater is discharging into creeks or streams, like you see right here, and this is an urban stream. Rapid infiltration basins. A lot of municipalities have rapid infiltration basins, and these are just basins where the water comes from the wastewater treatment plant, is discharged into these basins, and it infiltrates into the ground and recharges the aquifer. And that water is getting no more treatment, no more cleansing than the condition that it came out of the wastewater treatment plant. And likewise for spray fields, a lot of municipalities send their treated wastewater to spray fields, and they spray it out onto the ground, and it infiltrates into the ground and into the aquifer. But the beauty of treatment wetlands is when that water goes into a wetland through a lot of natural processes, which I'll show you. There's a much more cleansing ability that occurs in the wetlands, and so it removes a tremendous amount of nitrogen and other pollutants by going through a wetland that you do not get from these methods.
Hey, Debbie, this isn't the upgraded presentation. The one that...
No.
Okay.
So here's an example of the Lake City wetlands. The Lake City used to dispose of its waste, its treated effluent at a spray field. And this is the spray field, and they had trees growing in the spray field. But the city converted part of their spray field, 1/3 of their spray field, to a treatment wetland. And then, so it was a conversion from the spray field to the treatment wetland. And it's been a tremendous success in the amount of nitrogen that's been removed from the effluent, and this water is infiltrating into the ground. This is the recharge area for the Ishnatucknee Springs. So now the water that's going into the ground is going down and flowing underground to the Ishnatucknee Springs. So it was actually a springs restoration project as well as a treatment, creating a treatment wetland. Yes. So why are treatment wetlands so bird rich? Well, there's a lot of nutrients that are coming in through the water, through the wastewater. And even though it's been treated, there's still a lot of nitrogen in that wastewater. And so that nitrogen is fueling this huge complex food web within the whole wetland system. So that's one of the reasons that treatment wetlands are so bird rich. Also, when you add water to an environment, you're bringing in so many more birds, so many more organisms, and so many more birds. And so when you convert an upland area to a treatment wetland, you still have the surrounding uplands, but you also have that water source that is attracting so many birds. And then the habitat diversity. If you can create a lot of diverse habitats within that landscape, then you're really going to increase the number of birds that you have coming in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Gainesville and Sweetwater Wetlands and kind of explain to you why Sweetwater was built in the first place. And I know that Alachua Audubon just had a field trip to Gainesville 2 weeks ago, and I know that you all went to Sweetwater Wetlands. So this is an urban creek that starts out in downtown Gainesville. It's called Sweetwater Branch, and it flows down. And historically, it discharged right here at the north end of Paynes, Prairie. And that was one of the main sources of water for this huge prairie system. Well, Paynes Prairie was privately owned for many, many years, and the cattle ranchers, the Camp Brothers, excavated a big canal, a mile-long canal, to divert that water coming from Sweetwater Branch to the lowest part on Paynes Prairie, which is Alachua Sink, because they were trying to dehydrate this and dry this area up to make it better for cattle ranching. And so, and it did, it dehydrated, it didn't dry this out completely, but it dehydrated it enough that the cows could graze at during most of the time. And then, so the stream has gone down, flowed down to the Alachua Sink, carrying all of the stormwater discharge from all of the impervious areas that are around downtown. Well, then the Main Street wastewater treatment plant was built right here, and guess where they discharged their wastewater?
Same place.
Into Sweetwater Branch, yes. And when it was first built, it had very little cleansing. So there was very highly polluted water going to Alachua Sink. And over the years, it upgraded and upgraded and upgraded. But still, there was a tremendous amount of pollutants that were flowing through this creek and this canal going to Alachua Sink. Alachua Sink is flowing into the aquifer. And we have a drawdown, a cone of depression from our well field in Gainesville that's directing the flow of the aquifer all the way down to this area towards the well field. So eventually that water can end up in our aquifer and at our well field. Well, it's ending up in the aquifer, but going to our well field. So the state of Florida said, Gainesville, you need to clean this up. You're causing too much pollution to the aquifer here. And so the city did several alternatives analysis and determined that building a treatment wetland right here, capturing this stormwater that's coming from down here and the wastewater coming from here, capturing it, cleansing it up, and then discharging it onto Paynes Prairie was the most cost-effective and technologically the best approach to this problem. So this is just to show you, this is the wastewater treatment plant where the wastewater from downtown Gainesville, or the whole eastern side of Gainesville comes to this wastewater treatment plant. It's treated and then it's discharged into Sweetwater Branch. This is the creek. And then stormwater is also collected all along the path of Sweetwater Branch. It goes into the creek as well.
Ask a question.
Sure.
What is it treated with at the,
When I say treated wastewater,
yeah,
it's going through the wastewater treatment plant. It's advanced.
what is it treated with though?
Well, it's the whole process of the whole wastewater treatment plant, going from its advanced.
It's an activated sludge, a wastewater treatment plant. So activated sludge is bacteria that is aerated there, and the bacteria remove the dissolved BOD, the oxygen-demanding materials in the water. So the treatment plant primarily removes organic matter and to a certain extent nitrogen, but not nearly all of it.
Right.
And it's chlorinated?
Yes, it is.
So here is the scenario now with the treatment wetland. The wetland was built right here. It's 125 acres. This canal was filled in, so there's no longer that direct connection. And the water, after it goes through Sweetwater Wetlands, it discharges and sheet flows out into the prairie and is restored about over, I think, 1,500 acres of Paynes Prairie. So there's been many benefits by creating Sweetwater Wetlands Park. And I wanted to point out that it costs about $25 million to build the treatment wetland. And this is a high price tag because the construction, which is the highest cost, the construction conditions were the absolute worst because they were building a wetland on mucky soils. There was always water coming in here. They could never turn that spigot off. And so they're trying to do all of this dirt work, moving dirt, digging, excavating, filling with this water source coming in. And they were always diverting and had dewatering pumps going. And so that was the most complicated conditions for building the wetland. But it cost $25 million to build the treatment wetland. If they had upgraded the treatment plant to achieve the same kind of performance as the wetland, it would have cost $45 million. So that's a huge difference. And it's because the wetland is removing nitrogen to such a low level that to achieve that at a wastewater treatment plant would be extremely expensive. So this is what's happening. The nitrogen, total nitrogen coming out of the wastewater treatment plant is about 3.5 parts per million, which is pretty low. That's a good performance for a wastewater treatment plant because they did upgrade it as well. But then it goes through the wetlands, cells 1, 2, and 3, and it's coming out at about 0.9 parts per million. That's a tremendous amount of removal that, like I said, would be extremely expensive to get at a wastewater treatment plant. So how does a wetland remove the nitrogen? What's going on? Well, the process is called denitrification, and it's a net removal of nitrogen from the water. So the key is for the nitrogen at the wastewater treatment plant to get converted to nitrate nitrogen. That would be the oxygenated form of nitrogen, nitrate nitrogen. And so when nitrate nitrogen comes into the wetland system, the nitrogen is converted to nitrogen gas, and there's a net removal of nitrogen from the system. So that nitrogen is being completely removed and converted into nitrogen gas. And the way that happens, it's a natural microbial process, and it's a gazillion microbes. All these bugs in the sediment are converting the nitrate nitrogen to nitrogen gas because they're chowing down, they're eating the organic matter, and there's very little oxygen, so their oxygen source is this oxygen over here in nitrate. So all of these bugs are eating the organic matter, and you have to have very little or no oxygen in the water so that they're using this nitrogen source, and they convert that nitrate to nitrogen gas, and it's a complete loss. And the way to think about this, how many gardeners do we have in the room? You know, when you mulch your garden, and after several months, that mulch just kind of disappears.
Mhm.
And it's those microbes that are
Mhm.
chowing down on it, that they're decomposing that organic matter, right? Well, they're using the oxygen in the air. Well, these microbes are using the oxygen that's on the nitrogen, that nitrate. So that's the process that's occurring. So what has to happen for this to occur is it has to be continuously flooded. If the wetland dried out and oxygen came in, you wouldn't have that denitrification process. And you have to have vigorously growing plants, completely vegetated, so that there's always an organic source going into the sediments. Because the plants, when they grow new leaves, they slough off their old leaves, and that organic matter goes into the sediments. So it's really nice. There are no chemicals, no pumps. It's sunlight, plants, and water. So here's a drawing of Sweetwater Wetlands Park. And what happens is that the water comes in right here. This is the start of the process. This is where Sweetwater Branch enters. And the water comes into this reservoir, and then it's diverted to cells 1, cells 2, and cells 3. The water flows slowly through the cell. It collects in this deep water zone, and then it slowly flows through here. This is where all the denitrification's occurring. And then in about 5 or 6 days later, the water reaches the south end. It collects into this long canal, and it's pushed off into the prairie. And this is where it's rehydrating this area. So that is how this wetland system works. The brown areas are walking berms. There's over 3.5 miles of walking berms here, so you're up elevated and you can see out over the wetland. There's 2 emergency bypass areas. So if we get continuous high rains for many days, or a tropical storm, or too much water that could, because remember, stormwater is coming into this too. It's not just wastewater. So the wastewater amount is pretty even over time, but the stormwater can pulse up when you have a lot of storms and go down. So there's a very uneven flow source. So when we have lots and lots of water come in, instead of that water going through the cells where they could potentially flood the cells too much and kill the plants, because remember, we want those plants to be healthy and vigorously growing. We can bypass, the water can bypass these cells and flow around on this bypass and this bypass. So that has really been important for making this function. So a little story, I was on the design, both my husband and I were on the design team for Sweetwater Wetlands Park. And when early in this design, the wetland was a rectangle, just a boring rectangle, and that was what it looked like from a design standpoint. And we were on doing a series of meetings with the engineer. We're both scientists, and we said, can you make this a little more interesting? The rectangle is not an interesting looking feature. It doesn't look natural. And he really took that to heart and came back the next day and he said, what do you think about this? And he had a design of an alligator head. Can you see that alligator head? And that's how it was built, as an alligator head, which is very appropriate since we are the Florida Gators, and there's a gazillion gators out there too.
And not after college.
So, so to get the water to each of the cells, there is the water control structures, and this is what it looked like when it was being built. A very big structure, and that's what conveys water into the cells and out of the cells. And if you were to look down into it, take the lid off, and look down in, there's an adjustable weir. So this gate could be raised or lower, and that controls how much water either goes into the cell for the inflow structures, or how much water goes out of the cells for the outflow structures. So that's how you can adjust the water levels by raising or lowering that gate. And this is what it looks like if you're walking out at Sweetwater. There's one of these at the beginning of each cell and at the end of each cell. And if you walk by it, you'll hear the water rushing through, and that's the water coming in or going out. The city spent almost $2.5 million on public use facilities, and that has really I mean, it's a hugely popular park because of that. And the visitation at Sweetwater, it started out in 2015. It was only open on the weekends because they didn't have the staff yet to open it, and so very low visitation. But you can see how it's climbed every year since then. So now it's the most popular park in Gainesville. So some of the contributions that Alachua Audubon has made to Sweetwater Wetlands, I wanted to bring this up because I know that you have partnerships with other facilities or features like this. Alachua Audubon designed and we print and furnish these bird ID brochures, and I've got a couple to pass around. But if you open it, it has the 24 most common birds seen at the wetlands, and then inside there's locations for birding in Gainesville, what Alachua Audubon does, and a membership guide. So this has turned out to be the most popular brochure that the park puts out, and we partnered with different entities, and they've been paying for the brochure. So that's a really nice feature. So we do guided bird walks every Wednesday morning from September through May, so not in the very hottest months. And so that's every Wednesday. And I lead the second Wednesday of the month, which was yesterday actually. And whenever I do that, I ask how many people are from out of town. And it's just amazing how many visitors we have, birders that are passing through or people coming to stay with family and find out about Sweetwater. So I'm always amazed at how many new and out-of-town people come. We donated 15 pairs of binoculars to Sweetwater, so the rangers, whenever they have the educational programs, they can use those donated binoculars. And we funded a whiteboard map, and so it's this big map of Sweetwater, and it's a whiteboard that you can write on. And so if you see a rare bird or something interesting, you can put an arrow on the park, on the map where it is, so other people know, because it was hard when these rare birds were showing up and then you had 125 acres. Where do you go to see it? We are funding the transportation of fourth graders to field trips to Sweetwater Wetlands Park and Morningside. The county cut back on the funding for these nature programs, and so that was something that we were able to be kind of a behind the scenes on this environmental education program. And we're in the process of funding educational signs for cells 2 and 3, which do not have any signs. And we're constructing a forested nature trail. That was in the original design, but it never got built. And so it looks like maybe it will happen now. So how do you enhance the wildlife value at sites like this? And as I mentioned, Sweetwater's very high on the eBird list. It's tied for number 32 at 262 species. On the Christmas bird count, we get right around 100 species in about 3/4 of a day at this one site. So that's pretty phenomenal, the number of species. And I would say that probably the biggest key to this is habitat diversity. If you're already going to, this is Sweetwater, this is the alligator head upside down. And you park right here and walk through the entrance right here. This is cell 1, 2, and 3. And so if you have habitat diversity, the more diverse habitats you have, the more opportunities for different types of birds and wildlife to come in. And so Sweetwater already had this thick tree line around. So you already had this upland habitat. But now there's the open water, there's shrub wetlands, there's a lot of buffer area around the cells, and that's really important. The shrubby areas, these weedy areas, we've had yellow-breasted chat, Wilson's warblers. In migration, you can walk around and see quite a few prairie warblers and yellow warblers. So there's just a lot of, the habitat diversity is a really important feature for increasing the wildlife value. And so if you look at, this is the treatment wetland, that's not very diverse, is it? There's habitat in there, probably a lot of, in the wintertime, swamp sparrows, marsh wrens, rails, Virginia rail, king rail, soar rails, but this is not very diverse. But if you could add to that this shrubby, the tree line, the open water area right here, this is a tree island that was just planted during the early construction stage. And now these trees are grown pretty high and providing a good forested area. And for here, if you can leave a lot of weedy areas and decrease the mowing as much as possible, that's going to also increase the habitat. Hugely important, and both this wetland and the Lake City wetland, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, the tree islands have been really important for rookeries. And this is a tree island. There were this clump of cypress trees where the original footprint was for Sweetwater. And so in our design, we said, let's leave these trees and build the wetland for the rest of the footprint. If the trees live, that will be great. If they don't, at least they will serve a purpose until they die. And even when they die, they'll have the logs that fall in. And they could die because we're flooding and digging around them and making it much deeper and wetter. Well, they declined somewhat, but these have been the location of quite a few great blue heron nests and hinga nests. And those are the obvious birds that we can see. But I'm sure a lot of other things have nested in there as well. So that's really important in that landscape of a treatment marsh. This is the Lake City wetland, and there was a line of Carolina willows where they built the wetland. So they left the willows, and lo and behold, a rookery developed. There was no rookery there before because it was just a spray field, an upland spray field before. Cattle egrets and other types of egrets and herons, and we found glossy ibis nesting in there. That was the first documented case, at least that I could find, of glossy ibis nesting in Lake City, Columbia County. And they probably had, but it's not very common. And so, and here's another example at Sweetwater, a tree island that was left. You can see the marsh was built all around it. There's not much diversity here in terms of habitat, although it's a lot of marsh habitat. But just having this tree island, and you have logs and trees that fall, and it's just much more valuable for wildlife, including this black-crowned night heron juvenile that was in there. So another thing is having snags, and wetland birds, of course, are feeding in the edge of the water or along the water, but they like to perch in areas. And this was, the contractor kind of thought we were a little wacko when we asked if he would plant a few dead trees in Sweetwater. But he did, and because they had a lot of trees that they cut down, and so he put in some trees. There's a couple of them, and look, I mean, it was like immediate to have birds coming and perching on them. They have since fallen down, but they lasted for probably 3 years or so. And then having open water areas, and you can see all the ducks that are back in here. This was kind of early on also. A lot of the open water areas have filled in with floating plants, which for water quality treatment is fine. It's not quite the same duck habitat, but having open water where you can is also increases the wildlife habitat or wildlife diversity. So Sweetwater's been so successful in Gainesville, both from a water quality enhancement perspective and a public use facility, that the city of Gainesville decided that they would build a second treatment wetland. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants in Gainesville, and so the other wastewater treatment plant that's on the far west side of Gainesville is now going to be the source of water for a second treatment wetland. And so This is Gainesville. This is where Sweetwater is, right here. And if you go all the way out on the west side of town, this is the Oaks Mall right here, and go out here, kind of where Allen, where you used to live. This would be like biking distance to where you used to live. Is going to be the new groundwater recharge wetland. And that may not be the final name, but that's what they're calling it. That's what they started calling it, and then they changed it to Southwest Gainesville Wetland, and I just stuck with the old first name. But this is going to be a wetland that is a groundwater recharge wetland, and that is that the water is going to come in, flow through the wetland, and then recharge straight down to recharge the aquifer. And it has sandy soils, very sandy, porous soils, and so it would not be a good site to have a flow-through wetland like Sweetwater. This is the Kanapahawk wastewater treatment plant, and this is where the source of wastewater will be coming from. This will not get any stormwater, unlike Sweetwater, which also has stormwater coming in. So the groundwater recharge wetland, this is the existing site. It doesn't look very productive from a birding standpoint, does it? We conducted, 2 volunteers at Alachua Audubon have conducted quarterly baseline bird surveys, well, 4 years worth, and had 51 bird species. And so remember, we get almost 100 bird species on the Christmas bird count in one day, and this is 4 surveys. So it's going to be really fun to see how this transforms and what we get. This is the artist rendering showing it's just in the early design stages now. But this is what they're envisioning, is this area. You can see the wetland cells here. And then this would be a walking path to go through it. And this is what I was talking about, a flow-through wetland versus an infiltrating wetland. Sweetwater Wetlands and the Orlando Wetlands Park are both flow-through wetlands. And water comes in at one end, flows through the wetland where the denitrification occurs, and then it flows out the other end. It discharges to a receiving water body, which is often a stream or a creek. In our case, it's Paynes, Prairie. Orlando Wetlands, where is it discharging, Bob?
St. John's River.
Eventually it's St. John's River, but there's something in between.
There's a creek in the middle.
Yeah, it's a creek.
A creek that flows to the St. John's River.
Canal.
So the infiltrating wetland, the new wetland that will be built at Gainesville, water will come in, it will flow through the wetland cells, and then it will infiltrate into the ground. There will be no superficial exit point of that water. This is just another diagram showing how the reclaimed water, the wastewater, will come into the wetland cells, flow through it. You'll have the denitrification occurring down here in the anaerobic zone, and then that cleaner water will recharge the aquifer. So this is the schedule. The land has already been purchased, and it's in the early design stages. Construction, so is in the design stage mostly this year. Next year, if everything goes to schedule, the construction will begin, and then in 2026 is when it's estimated for completion. So when y'all have a field trip to Gainesville again, in a couple of years, we'll have another wetland site. This is another similar recharge wetland. This is the Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park. Has anyone visited that site? Good, good. It's right off the interstate on the north side of Ocala. And so it's open to the public, it's free. And that is a similar treatment wetland that is getting wastewater from the Ocala wastewater treatment plant. The water flows through these wetland cells, and then it infiltrates into the aquifer.
Right. They've got a new pavilion being dedicated soon, right?
A pavilion?
Yeah,
I think I heard about that.
I've got that on my calendar. I don't want to look it up right now.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Good, good.
Just everybody Google Ocala Wetlands Park and you'll find it.
Yeah, I know that they've built apartment complexes all around it, which is too bad, but.
Too bad.
So this is the Lake City treatment wetland, which I mentioned earlier, and water is coming in from, the wastewater treatment plant is a few miles north. The water is pumped to this lagoon, and from there it goes to the cells. The water has 3 different pathways. It goes cells 1, 2, and 3, and then to cell 4, which is where it infiltrates in the aquifer. Then there's another pathway, which is cells 7, 8, and 9, and then it goes to 4. And then the third pathway, which I think is 5 and 6 that goes to 4, but I'm not sure. But there's 3 different pathways. And that's important because if for some reason you needed to take cell 1 offline for whatever reason, for some kind of construction, you could still use the rest of the wetland cell because you have 2 other pathways. This wetland, this was a spray field that they converted. There's another spray field south of this road that they use, and another spray field that's over on, right over in here that they also use, and they're getting ready to convert one of the spray fields. This has worked so well that they're getting ready to convert another one of their spray fields to a treatment wetland.
It has a lot of good birds.
It does. It's closed to the public, but the staff is really accommodating, and whenever we ask if we can go bird watching there, they say yes. We do. It's within the Lake City Christmas bird count circle. We do the count there, and we have gotten about equally number of bird species, close to 100 species on the Christmas bird count here. And so 162 species have been recorded at that site, and again, it's closed to the public. So at this site, the Audubon next to Alachua Audubon is Four Rivers Audubon. And so we teamed together. The wetland is kind of in between our 2 Audubon chapters. And so we teamed together and installed 1 purple martin nesting gourd about 4 years ago. And we put it up in the winter, and about 3 months later it was full of purple martins. And they nested and they filled all the gourds. So that winter we put up another one, and then that next breeding season they filled up the gourds again. We've done that 4 times. Last year, I didn't change this. Last year we fledged over 150 purple martins at the wetlands, and so last month we just put up another one. So we're going to see. It's really exciting. I mean, there's just it's in the nesting season for purple martins. You go out there and there's like probably 100 of them flying around, and so that's really exciting. So how do you build a treatment wetland? Well, a lot of clearing, grubbing, and moving dirt. And the challenge for the engineering challenge for Sweetwater, and I'm sure it was done for Lake City too, is called balancing the cut and fill. And what that means is that you don't want to bring any dirt into the site or take any dirt out, because that's very, very expensive moving dirt. So they're excavating and they're filling all within the site. So you're trying to balance that cut and fill so that all the dirt that you excavate, you have a use for it right there on the site. So for Sweetwater, it took 3 years of construction. It was quite a challenging project. And these are pictures from Sweetwater. And then after you are moving, you've cleared it and you've done the earthwork, you build the wetland cells. This is cell 2. This is the deep water zone. This is the marsh that hasn't been planted yet. And so the water is just in the deep zone, and you do elevation gradients to make sure that you have all of your grades and elevations correct. And then when the survey is determined to be correct, you slowly fill the marsh and make it shallow like this, and you bring in the wetland plants. And these plants were harvested from a permitted nursery, a natural marsh, and you can go in and collect the plants. It's called a donor marsh, and the plants arrive in these tubs. These tubs have holes in them so that they could be in the water and stay hydrated while they're being planted. This water is only about 4 to 6 inches deep because these are just bare root plugs. And the water's kept low for 1 or 2 months, so as the plants establish and start producing, expanding their root system. So the plants that were planted at Sweetwater and at the Lake City Wetland, the edge plants were soft rush, Juncus offusius, and sand cordgrass, the Spartina bakeri, and these were just along the edge. But inside of the marsh, there were 5 wetland species that were planted, and these were all native, vigorously growing plants, very adapted to continuous inundation. And it was pickerelweed, lanceleaf arrowhead, giant bulrush, fire flag, and the fire flag was selected because it's the preferred food of purple gallinules. And purple gallinules were hard to find in Alachua County. It was a hard year bird to get on your year list. And we planted this, and now they're breeding there. They're very, I won't say they're common, especially when you compare it to the common gallinule, but they're there and they're breeding, and we see quite a few. And then the 5th plant is the knotted spike rush. So those are the 5 species that were planted. They were planted on 3.5-foot spacings. You can see them planting, so you can see that the water level is really shallow here, and that's so that the plants can get established. And just in 2 months, look at the difference. This was during the growing season. This was planted around April or May, so it's prime growing season for plants, and they grew very quickly. This is the deep water zone. This is the shallow marsh. This is a tree island that was left, and there's one of our planted snags right here. And this is 1 year post-planting. The plants have completely filled in. They're fertilized every day with that nitrogen water coming in. And so I just conclude by saying that what are the benefits of treatment wetlands? The primary reason that you have these are you're cleaning the wastewater and stormwater, in the case of Sweetwater, that's coming into the wetland system. It's a way of getting much cleaner effluent. It also protects the receiving water bodies. So for the Orlando Wetlands Park, it's helping to protect the St. Johns River by having cleaner water going in. For Sweetwater, it's helping to protect Paynes Prairie. In this case, it was much more economical to build than upgrading the wastewater treatment plant, and it enhances wildlife value. And for the local area, this isn't so much environmental, but it provides a recreational, educational, and ecotourism opportunity for communities. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.